Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Labor Talk. We're here this week with Dan Block, the Vice President of Client Relations at Permanent Solutions Labor Consultants, and a tenured Human Resources and Labor Relations Consultant. How are you today, Dan?
I'm doing fantastic, thank you.
Excellent. And of course, we're here with Rick Torres, the CEO and President of Permanent Solutions Labor Consultants. Rick, how are you?
Doing great, James. How are you?
I'm doing very well. Thanks for asking. Okay, guys, today I want to talk about the supervisor's role in maintaining a positive employee relations environment. We talk a lot about supervisors on our program, and I know you both have a lot of experience in dealing with, training, and even acting as supervisors yourselves. So, Dan, let's start with you since you're our guest. Could you explain just the essence of a supervisor's role in maintaining that positive workplace environment?
Sure, I appreciate that. You know, all too often, James, I feel that a lot of companies really don't understand the weight of the responsibility that a supervisor has in maintaining a positive labor relations environment. Because ultimately, it comes down to the fact of communications. Effective, coherent, consistent communications that is mutually appreciated and understood by all parties. And I'll expand on that a little bit. All too often, what I think we see happen is that executive leadership molds a message that they wish to relay to all of the population in a company. And certainly they all have a sense of understanding what that message is. But as that message is disseminated through the ranks, as it gets to that level of the first line supervisor, all too often we see that perhaps there's a disconnect, a misinterpretation of what that message is, and ultimately it could have a serious impact and negative result to the subordinates of the main body of population for the company if they truly do not understand what that message is.
Well, you know, Dan, also, I think it's important to understand that the frontline supervisor, the supervisor that is more directly communicating with the employees, whether it be in healthcare, non-healthcare, it doesn't really matter, is the most important part of management. With the more important than, say, the CEO or the president, because they're the ones who deal with them on a regular basis. You know, and listening to your answer, Dan, and you explaining the role of the supervisor, so many times, and this is what really gets frustrating sometimes. So many times when upper management talks about, yes, we want to have a positive role, we want to have a positive communication, we want to have we want to have a good relationship with our employees. That so many times that the intent is good, and the intent usually works through the floor when times are running smooth. But what happens so many times, and this is what really gets which when the workers start talking about inconsistency, is when times are smooth and everything's running good. It's easy to be a good supervisor. But the consistency of being a good supervisor is even more important when times are running rough, when things aren't so smooth, when things start getting backed up. Then all of a sudden that top-down message, and it's a good message, but the upper management has to buy into it completely. In fact, what I like to say is staying positive communications part of your corporate DNA. But they have to understand also, as it comes down to the front line, if upper management starts yelling and screaming at the frontline supervisors to get things moving, then their natural recourse is going to take that frustration and that hostility and that attitude out on the floor.
So I think what you're touching up on here, Rick, is something that Dan mentioned before about that consistent communication.
Right.
So what we want to do here, and what you're suggesting for the top level executives all the way down to the frontline supervisors, is a calm, collected, comprehensive, and most importantly, consistent level and type of communication.
Absolutely.
Sure.
Yes.
You want to avoid, what, for lack of a better word, would call, a game of corporate telephone. Okay, so let's talk about that game of corporate telephone a little bit, that breakdown in communication. And we've all been there when we were younger. It was a common game to show us the perspective of other people and how messages can be, they can be broken down, they can be misconstrued, miscommunicated. How does that happen in your guys' experience in the workplace?
Well, James, really, think of it this way. As the communication is two ways. It's a two-way street. And as we were touching on a moment ago with Rick, as the communication is being disseminated from executive leadership through to the main body of population, the hourly folks, the same is true going the other way. The feedback and ultimately rumor control. And all of that rumor control must be filtered through that first line supervisor. And clearly, that is where a lot of the times the breakdown happens, because the supervisor may not be well trained or really may not have a strong experience to understand how to dissect that information, how to respond, how to inform other chains of command and chain of custody so that appropriate follow-up can be conducted. Because clearly, if anyone has any problems or concerns, even expressions of appreciation, they want to be able to get the feedback to know exactly what the company thinks about that.
Yeah, absolutely right on, Dan. And not only that, there has to be a system to take it back up to upper management also. And so many times there's no system, there's no process to take what is disseminated on the floor between the employees and the frontline supervisors back up, whether it be a positive message or a negative message. There's many times there's just no system to be able to do that. Who do we go to? Who do we talk to? Do they even want to hear it when we go and talk to them? Once again, it's the consistency of where we go and how we communicate these messages.
Sure, I feel like a lot of those base people, those hourly workers that we're referring to here, I feel as though they feel like the company is only concerned with the negative. They don't receive positive feedback, or when they have something to say to their frontline supervisors that's positive, they may not feel as though the top level executives, the end goal for that gateway that those supervisors provide care about that message or want to hear that message. So what could a supervisor do, or what are some things that supervisors could do to really facilitate that two-way street of communication?
Well, I'll tell you one of the biggest problems to address the question that you're asking now is you certainly don't want a supervisor to be a rogue. You don't want them to be responding inappropriately to any comments, criticism, complaint, or because the problem is a lot of times if there's a problem or an issue that is addressed to the first line supervisor, if they take the side of the employee without truly identifying the company's position on the matter, that is where the breakdown typically happens, because they do represent management.
Yeah, Dan, also, and we're talking about mechanical issues, but there's also a whole nother side of that. Also, is when we're talking about personal issues. When we're talking about someone may have problems at home, or they may have issues regarding their kids or their marriage or health issues, and it's not mechanical things that are handled easily, through upper management. Okay, what do? It's a problem, but it's not my problem, it's your problem. So there has to be an understanding of how you deal with people also on that personal level when they have personal issues that are happening within their lives or within their families' lives.
But don't you think also, Rick, the part of that has to go back to the training process too? Because all too often we see every type of business, Fortune 100 companies to small family-owned operations, and they take their best employee off the line, the one who they think, wow, they're always on time, they're always accountable, they're respected by their peers. I know, let's promote them into a supervisor role because they're good at the job. But unfortunately, a lot of times, as strong as the strengths are that they have to the talents and the skill level to do the job, they lack the necessary component to be a good supervisor.
I agree with you 100%. The thing about it is just because someone's good at one thing, running a machine or healthcare or non-healthcare, it doesn't matter. Just because someone's good at one thing doesn't mean that automatically they're going to be a good supervisor. And I think when you promote someone to a supervisory position, you have to give them the skills to be able to supervise. And I'm talking about dealing with people on a personal level also. So many times when management looks at, okay, we want a supervisor, and you look at the mechanical reasons why you want a supervisor. They know the operation, they know the mechanics of the operation, they know how to get this widget through the production line out to the shipping and receiving and out to the customers. But where is the training when it talks about how do we work with resolution, disputes on the floor? How do we deal with these personal issues that come up? And a lot of times it's lost when you go up to upper management. They say, well, that's not our problem, that's not our issue. But this is what begins the downward spiral that so many times management has, the employees have with management, is when they stop listening and talking to them on a personal level. It may not mean anything as far as your corporate structure, but to the employees on the ground who have these issues and these problems, it is everything to them. It is everything to them. And James, that's what creates that downward spiral, the mistrust, the miscommunication. And it goes down from there.
Right. So what I'm gathering here is that you can't apply a mechanical solution to a personal problem. But what it does seem like you can do is apply a mechanical solution to enable your supervisors to solve those personal problems. Vis-a-vis training, human relations, coaching, things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I tell you, a lot of times, even folks higher in the chain of command, perhaps they don't really even have that appropriate skill set, especially when you have a company that, is really growing, and they're trying to expand and they're bringing on additional people, and you have to have the right number of management. They certainly are challenged with those problems very frequently, and ultimately that's where we see a lot of our clientele come from.
Yeah, absolutely. It's more complicated, and I think Dan hit it right on when he stated at the beginning of this podcast that the role of the frontline supervisor is very complicated, and it has many different levels to it, and how he needs to be able to communicate with his people, both upper and lower.
I'm glad you mentioned that, Rick. The complication of that term supervisor. I feel like a lot of employees have a manager, they have a director, they have an executive officer, they have team leaders, and they may have a supervisor. But which of these people are a supervisor? What justifies a supervisor? What differentiates that between something like a manager or a director or a chief executive? Or are they all supervisors?
Well, you know what? And there's no defined definition of what a supervisor is. It's not the title that makes someone, officially, legally a supervisor.
Sure.
It's the job functions that make them, within the legal terms, a supervisor or a manager.
Yeah, you're exactly right, Rick. And I tell you, as impressive as it may sound, and a pat on the back to be able to give someone a title as supervisor or manager or director, ultimately I think companies need to understand the legal consequences pertaining to law as far as the definitions are concerned. And the National Labor Relations Act, ever since it was originally scripted, truly does a pretty good job as far as attempting to define what a supervisor is. And we find many times where companies are faced with a situation where they have someone, quote unquote, with a title, James, of supervisor, but ultimately they don't fit the description, the actual definition by law, and therefore they actually are protected by the act.
Yeah, and Dan, and so many times, how many times, Dan, have we gone into a situation to where there's an organizing campaign and management is treating what they consider supervisors as supervisors and giving them information and talking to them, when in fact the information and the communication and the training that they're giving them is against the act. It's against the law, because they're giving them information, they're talking to them about strategy, about how they deal with the employees, that makes it illegal.